Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with a look at your Alaska weather for this 15th of December. Thanks for watching tonight. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily by heading to 1-800-472-0391 on your phone. That's the Alaska Weather Information line, of course. You can find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, or if you haven't tried this recently, pull out your mobile device and type in mobile.weather.gov and then use your zip code or your village name or your city name, and you should be able to come up with a web page that's your mobile version of your website. Just save that to your home screen or bookmark that, and voila, you've got a mobile version of your National Weather Service forecast on your mobile device. Pretty cool. And if you can't find what you're looking for anytime, right there is an easy way to find me. If you've got some questions and need to ask somebody, don't know who to ask, I'm happy to step in and be that person. david.snider@noaa.gov is your way to let me serve you via email and online. Let's take a look at the hazards around Alaska tonight. Let's start in northern parts of southeast. A winter storm warning is in effect, and it'll go through the rest of tonight and into tomorrow. For areas generally above 1,000 feet is where we're concerned about. So this is not going to include Skagway, but generally areas along the Chilkat River and north of the Chilkat River Bridge to the border through the rest of tonight. About 6 to 8 inches of snow there is expected. This is not going to include Skagway once again, but it will really focus on and probably be the worst around the White Pass region, but again, not in Skagway. Winter storm warning is in effect there. That'll go through the rest of the evening. And out west, a winter weather advisory is posted. This one's going to be a little bit more for the blowing snow, not so much the snow that could be falling through the region as a front is working from south to north. And there's a pretty decent low pressure system sitting there very close to Nunivak Island. A lot of gusty winds with that, and it's really not going to move a whole lot as we go through the rest of the evening and overnight hours and through tomorrow. But the core of the winds is shifting northward, so as that passes through, you might get some stronger gusts up to about 45 miles per hour or so, and that could reduce visibility and maybe even drift some snow. And in very minor cases, you might even see a little bit of damage there from those stronger gusts there. But some wind blowing through the Yukon Delta as we head through the rest of tonight. Here's a look at it on satellite, and keep your eyes open for 3 circulations. One of them is fairly clear right here. You got another one across the Nunivak Island area, and another circulation closer to Kodiak, and you can see that kind of working its way right here. So 1, 2, 3 lows. Another one's coming in behind that as we head into Sunday. So a pretty active weather system, and we have remnants of low pressure systems also kind of lurking out here across the Yukon. The one across the Gulf is going to push a front closer into southeastern Alaska as we go through the weekend here. That is going to start to bring the winds up as we go through tomorrow. It's already driving snow into the Chilkoot and White Pass regions there. The low out across the west is pushing wind northward as we talked about, especially for the Yukon Delta right now, but it's going to keep snow and precipitation focused on the west coast as we go through the next couple days here. And for South Central, fairly steady south and westerly flow should keep snow in the forecast for many parts of the Matanuska, Susitna Valleys, and Anchorage and Kenai region. Kodiak, you're going to be really close to this, and rain and snow may be a part of your weekend entirely. Up north, the steady draw of air across from east to west is not only keeping the visibility down in some cases, especially across the Beaufort Sea, but it's also working to push the ice away from west and north-facing coastlines. So we're going to see a little bit more of a focus on those north-facing coastlines as we go through the rest of the weekend. And then this low here moving through the central chain is really going to stir it up. It looks like we're going to be able to achieve storm force winds as we get into tonight and tomorrow, and maybe approach hurricane force winds in some cases there. But strong storm force winds probably the most likely result of this low pressure system here. And as always, I like to point out on the satellite picture, you can see kind of the bubbling cloud structure here. That's upward moving air. It tells us there's a lot of instability in the atmosphere, and wouldn't be surprised to see some showers passing through the region and oh, maybe even an occasional lightning strike. We've seen that several times with some of these weather systems over the past week across the chain, across the Gulf, and very near southeastern Alaska. So that's a look at your satellite picture there. Notice a lot of cloud cover across the interior. There are some areas of light snow across the central and northern sections of the interior this afternoon. All this trying to run into a very weak area of high pressure across the central and eastern interior, and it's just not strong enough to kind of wipe any of these waves out right now. So today's map shows low pressure working across the Gulf. That's really no surprise, but once again, there's another renewed surge of warmer air heading northward, and as that heads toward the Gulf, it's going to keep rainfall going there across southern parts of southeast, and watch for all of that to fill in, it looks like, as we head into the next 24 hours. And the tight pressure gradient you see right here is going to be right over southeast as we go into tomorrow afternoon. A trough of low pressure north of the Alaska Range, that's helping to keep some snow flying across the interior. Pretty spotty, but areas of light snow and blowing snow across the north. And then here's our focus for those stronger winds across the Yukon Delta. That all around a 966 low, very close to Nunivak Island. And then another wave developing across the central chain. That's going to push eastward later tonight down to about 979. And again, that tight pressure gradient's all focusing in here. As we get in through tonight, notice areas of snow across the YK Delta, low pressure across the Kodiak Island region. And then here's our front extending out from all of that, working its way towards southeast. As we get into the nighttime hours, that's going to start bringing in a better chance of rain and keep snow going for Chilkoot and the White Pass regions there. Again, not for Skagway though. Areas around the Brooks Range all the way up toward the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound, Kotzebue and Shishmaref should expect some snow and probably some wind. Once again, those easterlies going across the North Slope will likely see some visibility reductions as a result of the winds gusting from time to time. But at this point, no warnings or watches for any of that, so good news there. The front's working through southeast as we go through your Saturday. Periods of rain mixed with snow should be expected at the lower terrain, and a look up top will probably reveal some fresh white snow there across some of your southeastern mountains there. So perhaps beautification project for the weekend there, thanks to Mother Nature. Areas of light snow around the Kenai Peninsula, Matanuska and Susitna valleys will continue. Rain mixed with snow around Prince William Sound, of course. And we're looking for a rain and snow mix around parts of Bristol Bay, all the way down towards Sand Point in the Alaska Peninsula. And then areas in the eastern chain expected to see rain changing to snow and then mixing and probably turning back to snow the further west you go. Through the central and western chain. Notice again, that pressure gradient is fairly tight here. Don't be surprised to get some stronger gusts through the gaps of the Alaska Peninsula and some of your favorite passes in the chain. One thing to note though, as we go from Saturday to Sunday, the weather changes quickly again, and the pressure gradient really tightens up here across the west. A 950 low moves back into the western bearing there. A fairly strong front working through the western chain. Winds are coming up sharply as we get into Saturday and Sunday, and we'll be watching that carefully. So watch for any marine statements and, of course, warnings and watches as we go ahead into the end of the weekend if you're out in the western chain, Adak and Atka, and eventually Nikolsky and Unalaska Dutch Harbor as we get into your Monday. Now looking across the Gulf, the front that we saw working through southeast really starts to fall apart. A 998 millibar low is expected there. A trough of low pressure will still keep the focus for rain clouds and snow clouds to develop. Look for that mix to continue across parts of southeast. Light snow continues around the Chukach and parts of the Copper River Valley. Now rain and snow extends all the way down toward Kodiak Island. Watch for pockets of snow across some parts of the upper Yukon Valley into the Koyukuk Valley, and also across the Tanana Valley, could include Fairbanks as we go through the rest of the weekend. And we still have a wave of low pressure here across the Seward Peninsula. That's going to keep visibilities down, snow blowing around a little bit, and light snow falling from Nunivak Island and the Yukon Delta, generally just east of the Pribilofs, but all the way up north of the Arctic Circle and Point Hope, and occasionally maybe even Point Lay. So things are going to be pretty unsettled as we go through the rest of the weekend here. The big focus, though, is going to shift out west with that new wave coming in by the end of the weekend. Let's talk temperatures for a moment. Saturday morning in southeast, you're looking at mid to upper 30s, lower 40s across the outer coast, and parts of Prince William Sound above freezing, as you would expect, around Kodiak Island, 34. Up north into the Tanana Valley, low to mid-teens are expected. Eagle, about 13. Northway, about 1 below, 7 above for Fort Yukon. The North Slope looking at temperatures that are at or above 0 through the Beaufort Seacoast. You might get some colder weather as you head down toward Point Lay. Either side of the Seward Peninsula, mid-teens there. Norton Sound and Unalakleet, you're looking at 23 degrees, mid to upper 20s for Southwest. Bethel about 21 and 30s for most of the chain, and the Pribilofs 31. A high of 33 there on Saturday. Teens and 20s for many in the interior. Probably going to be hard pressed to find some really cold air though. This is mostly that warmer than average kind of run we've been experiencing now for a while, and it looks like that will continue. For southeast, low to mid 40s, and many in south central you're looking at temperatures at or above freezing all the way through Kodiak and down into the Alaska Peninsula and the Chain. 33 again in St. Paul, as I said, 28 in St. Lawrence Island, and 3 around Barrow. Let's take a look at temperatures for Sunday morning. Still above freezing for southeast, south central, mid to upper 20s, lower 30s for Kodiak Island and the peninsula. Teens and 20s now for parts of south and west. Looks like Bethel, you're looking at 17 degrees, 14 in Nome, 8 for Kotzebue, and 4 below in Barrow. Many across the eastern Brooks Range will be warming up to 12, south central in the 20s and 30s, 30s and 40s for many in southeast. Nunivak Island closer to 28, Nome 20, and Shishmaref coming in at about 18 degrees to wrap up your weekend.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. IFR conditions will spread across the Copper River Valley and into southeast for a large part of the weekend. You'll notice on the north slope, IFR conditions are fairly widespread all the way from the Chukchi Coast and into the Beaufort Seacoast. In the upper Yukon Valley and the south-facing slopes of the eastern Brooks Range, and also into the YK Delta there, as well as northern areas of the Seward Peninsula. MVFR conditions will cover up quite a bit of the interior as well as the Bering Sea coast, and you'll see by the afternoon that the focus will continue to be on southeast, though some areas will see improvement. The higher terrain and Chilkoot and White Pass likely hold around IFR, and Juneau will be fairly close to that as well. Just outside of Yakutat and into the Copper River Basin, expect IFR conditions there. Most of the north slope will be under IFR, as well as the upper Yukon Valley and a large part of the YK Delta and the Kuskokwim Valley as we get in through Saturday afternoon. MVFR conditions around Portage Pass, but look for VFR up and down Cook Inlet. As we get into Sunday morning, IFR returns to a widespread area of the west and southwest, the central and eastern interior, and the north, with MVFR conditions continuing for places further south into the Susitna Valley, as well as the Matanuska Valley, areas around southern Kodiak Island, and the interior of southeast. The higher terrain once again still locked in with IFR. And watch for IFR across the Seward Peninsula, parts of Kotzebue Sound, Norton Sound, and returning out west with a new wave of weather moving in. As we get into Sunday afternoon, you can see some improvements across the interior. IFR pretty much in the same old spot for the Panhandle. The upper Yukon Valley socked in with IFR, and looking at parts of the middle Yukon Valley and the upper Koyukuk and Noatak Valleys with IFR conditions across the Brooks Range and moving eastward through the Bering Sea. Here's your pass conditions in detail for your Saturday now. Adigan Pass looking to lean back over toward IFR as we go through your Saturday. Same goes for Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass, I should say, starting out with MVFR there as we get into your Saturday morning. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass starting out at IFR, but some improvements are expected as we go through the day. Rainy Pass holding at MVFR conditions there. Windy Pass starting at IFR and then leaning over toward MVFR as we go through your afternoon. And we expect similar conditions as we go through Isabel Pass and further eastward. Mentasta Pass may start off a little bit on the clearer side, but it looks like snow showers and some rain may be possible in the region, so watch for some changes in the afternoon, but it may go back and forth as you go through the day. Tanita Pass likely starts at IFR and then sees improvement during the afternoon to MVFR. Portage Pass, similar conditions there. IFR in the morning, leaning over towards some improvement as the day goes on, and certainly better weather it looks like on the western side. Chilkoot and White Pass expected to be IFR through most of the day. The freezing levels indicate very little change out in the west. You can see this surge of warmth, though, poking its way back up into the eastern Gulf, with levels ranging from about 2,000 feet near Yakutat to 10,000 feet out across the eastern Gulf, south and west of Haida Gwaii. Most of southeast will be between about the surface freezing line and maybe about 4,000 feet across the outer coast there. Everywhere else across most of interior Alaska should be sub-freezing. Icing potential and risk tomorrow is going to be fairly widespread, but notice there's going to be several different levels out there, between about 5,000 and 10,000 feet for the north slope there. You'll have to climb above some of that low-level moisture. Out across south and west, above 5,000 feet for the YK Delta, and between about 4,000 and 5,000 feet for most of the Yukon Valley, and above 5,000 feet for southeast. So the risk is widespread. Those levels will be changing, so make sure you check again before you take off tomorrow morning. Jetstream has 2 waves of low pressure, the newest one developing across eastern Asia. Wind speeds surrounding that around 170 to 180 knots. We have a ridge now building quickly across the Bering Sea, and our current trough across Alaska, 120 to 140 knots, and a developing area of low pressure across the southern Rockies in the lower 48. Only worth mentioning as many people are starting into their holiday travel. This could develop into a decent snowstorm if the pattern continues in that direction for many across the Midwest and the East Coast. So keep an eye on that if you are traveling. Out across Saturday on 9,000 feet, you can see low pressure. They're driving in northerlies across the West Coast, northwesterlies for the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, and broad southwesterly flow now across the Gulf with wind speeds between 40 and 55 knots. Southerlies continue across the Alaska range. You can see wind speeds at 3,000 feet between 20 and 30 knots. Another wave of low pressure across the Alcan and right over Nunivak Island there. That's keeping north and easterlies across the Brooks Range and across Kotzebue Sound and Norton Sound, with that south and westerly flow still strong and focusing on the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern chain, with southwesterlies coming into southeast at this level between 20 and about 40 knots. Turbulence will focus on southeast for your Saturday. Below 6,000 feet, look for considerable moderate. Also around Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, and the chain below 4,000 to 8,000 feet, and also considerable moderate across the western Brooks Range and Kobuk and Noatak valleys. We'll be back with your marine forecast here in just a few minutes. Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining me today are not just one, but two people, both with the last name Stevens, which is even more fun, but no relation. We have Eric Stevens from Dehne and George Stevens, who is a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Awesome. And today you guys brought a really cool toy, or I should say tool, with you. It's a sandbox, but why are you guys working on a sandbox?
Well, it's part of our senior design project, and we were approached by AKwx to build this for them. They had a proof of concept that they developed about a year ago, I think, and they wanted a more robust version that they could pack onto a plane and take places, and it's a handy learning tool for kids and adults.
So you're a mechanical engineering student. You've built a traveling sandbox for the experimental program to stimulate competitive research, EPSCoR, and Dehne's facilitated this. But why do we need a traveling sandbox?
Well, the prototype was such a big hit that they decided they wanted another one, actually two, that that would be easier to travel with, possibly marketable even.
Okay, so this is a traveling sandbox that's got a lot of bits and pieces and a computer hooked up to it. What is the computer doing with the sand?
The computer actually uses a Kinect sensor to read the topography of the sand or the shape of the sand, and then the computer translates that into information which it projects using a projector onto the sand, showing topographical lines and which is representative of the shape of the sand.
Okay, so this is a live mapping tool?
Yeah. It's interactive. As you're moving your hands through it, it is actively following and changing the lines to fit what you're doing.
That sounds like something I could have in my backyard.
Yep.
It'd be a lot of fun. So you guys had to change the design a little bit to make this more Alaska-fied, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, how'd you do that?
Well, the original was made out of basically lumber and Simpson strong tie type stuff, and we rebuilt it to make it lighter and basically more transportable. We can pack it down to a fairly small size, and it can be loaded onto a plane and flown anywhere in the state. Which
you guys did today. And you have plans to take this in other places of Alaska, right?
Yep, we're actually going to be headed down to Homer with it later today.
Okay, very good. Eric, how does this fit into science learning around Alaska?
Well, you know what? I think it is a tool and it is a toy. And it brings out a smile from an 8-year-old and the smile from a 48-year-old with that inner 8-year-old wanting to get out. The sandbox, it's an interactive learning tool that teaches us how topography in the 3 dimensions is related to, say, a 2-dimensional map. More about that later. Just like George was saying, it's got a Kinect sensor, not just for video games anymore. It can sense out the lay of the land there, feeds that information in the computer identifies that, sends a signal to a projector to send topographic lines to map over that lumpy ground. So you get a 3-dimensional topo map out of it. And my favorite thing about it, this is the thing that stops people at the trade show, they stop at your booth and don't leave, is that you run your hand through that sandbox and it responds in real time. It remaps the topography as you get to be Mr. Tectonic Plate Drifter there. You can make things how you want. Well, what if we made a really high mountain here and a low valley there, and the lines adjust to what you did? It's a learning tool because it shows you that connection between these two-dimensional topo lines, and what's really out in Alaska. And Alaska's a place with all kinds of topography. You know, we're from the Great Plains, where topo maps tend to be just like blank pieces of paper, but Alaska is particularly gifted in this regard, and this tool helps us, I think, learn more about our state, really.
Absolutely. And so this is going to enhance STEM learning, the science, technology, engineering, and math in many different locations around Alaska. Then this would be something that kids and teachers can get their hands on.
It sure is. And I mentioned the it's like flypaper at a booth that, or at the Science Potpourri when we had Greg's original version of this sandbox, and that one was made out of scraps of wood, and it was a prototype. But even that one, before it had some of the refinements that George and crew have made for this newer, upscaled, maybe a 2.0 version of the sandbox, even that one was so attractive to people. It just demonstrated that this has potential to be a learning tool, an outreach tool, an education tool that now is portable and can go places in Alaska. Of course, there's only one sandbox, can't be everywhere at once, but hopefully it gets out there, gets the word out about EPSCoR and what science is being done here for Alaskans.
All right, that sounds really interesting, and I can't wait to get my hands in the sand and try this out for myself. We're going to demonstrate this here in our next segment of Alaska Weather Facts, but before we go, we want to remind you that EPSCoR, which is a new acronym for me now, but I'm going to remember this because you can follow them on Facebook and Twitter, and I invite you to do that. Alaska EPSCoR is also something that facilitates science learning at the University of Alaska around the state, and that stands for Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. So check that out, and make sure you tune in tomorrow because we're going to have the next version where we actually get our hands in the sand and check out how this works and demonstrates that topography. So for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and we'll see you again next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a quick check of your sea ice edge on this 15th of December, and as we were saying the other day, Beaufort sea ice is sealed in there, but just across the Chukchi coast you can see the easterly winds are having some effect on the solid ice pack, or the concentrations of above 80%. There are a few areas they're not quite calling that a lead, but south and west of Barrow and just north of Wainwright, if you're looking out and seeing some patches of open water, the thicker concentration ice really isn't that far away from you, but probably right next to the coast you can see some water. Out across the Bering Strait and north, there is certainly some lower concentration ice, probably some open water there. And one thing that's going to happen over the next few days is as we get into a little bit more of a stronger southerly flow across the west coast, north-facing coastlines there across the Seward Peninsula, the Yukon Delta, Norton Sound, we'll probably see some ice pulling away from the coast and that moving around a little bit. So be prepared for some changes in south of Nunivak Island. Most of that ice may actually disappear with the warmer weather moving in. Let's take a look at the weather in southeast now. Look for stronger southerlies to develop as we get into tomorrow. Gusts up to 45 knots there in the northern Lynn Canal with 6-foot seas, 9-foot seas in Clarence Strait. And a general onshore flow, south and westerlies up to 30 to 35 knots, anywhere from 15 to 16-foot seas are expected there for Saturday. And a little bit of a diminishing wind as we get into Sunday, but not a whole lot. Southerlies there are expected across the inside passages, 20 to 30 knots, 4 to 7-foot seas in the region, and a south and westerly flow across the eastern Gulf. Notice considerably higher seas, though, out over the open water there, so keep that in mind if you're heading across for any reason. Saturday, look for southwesterlies inside of Prince William Sound, 20 knots, 3-foot seas. Across the coast, you're looking at 30 knots with 14 to 15-foot seas expected there. In Cook Inlet, northerlies on the northern end, 2-foot seas, and a little bit further down the coastline, about 3 to 4-foot seas with a west and southwesterly flow. As we get into Sunday, seas are coming up across the outer coast. A little bit of a stronger wind over the Barren Islands, 25 to 30 knots there for Sunday with 8 to 12-foot seas there. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, still looking at small seas and light winds across the northern Gulf, anywhere from 15 knots with 12 to 13-foot seas around low pressure. Inside of Bristol Bay, a southerly flow expected there on Saturday, 30 knots with 7-foot seas, and you can notice the stronger winds and higher seas coming in to the southern Bering Sea coast, 40 knots with 13-foot seas. Southwesterlies on the other side, 30 to 40 knots with seas as high as 24 feet around Sand Point. In Shelikof Strait, 20 knots with a 5-foot sea, 30 knots on the other side of Kodiak Island. And then we reverse course into a northwesterly flow as low pressure moves into the Gulf. Seas coming up to 16 to 20 feet and 10 to 21 feet as you move down the Bering Sea coast on that 30-knot wind for Sunday along the Alaska Peninsula. For the Aleutian chain, west and southwesterly winds are expected, or northwesterly winds I should say, 35 to 40 knots. 45 knots south of Adak and Atka with 25 to 26 foot seas in the region. Stronger westerly winds out across Kiska and Attu at 30 to 35, 16 to 18 foot seas. And then once you get into Sunday, a big change with that new low moving in down around 950 millibars or so south, and westerlies up to 50 knots, 28 to 30 foot seas are expected in the west. And considerably different out ahead of that, anywhere from 30 to 45 knots, 25 knots around Nikolsky to Atka, and 15 to 16 foot seas on the south side, up to 20 foot seas north of Unalaska to Nikolsky. For the west coast, still looking at north and westerly winds from St. Paul to St. George and St. Matthew there, 14 to 17 foot seas. You'll notice the ice again coming in along the outer coast, 25 knots around St. Lawrence Island with 10 foot seas, southerlies around the Kuskokwim Delta at 25 knots. And then for Sunday, a north and westerly flow fills in. Look for seas anywhere from 7 to 12 feet and a west and southwesterly flow from St. Matthew to the Pribilofs there around 25 to 35 knots, and 10 to 14 foot seas are expected. North and easterly winds across the Beaufort Sea coast. Over the ice, 25 to 30 knots there, and across the Chukchi coast, north and easterlies anywhere from 25 to 35 with 5 foot seas still outside of Kotzebue Sound, and northerly winds coming over 10 foot seas in the Bering Strait region down towards St. Lawrence Island. For Sunday, east and northeasterly should continue at anywhere from 20 to 25 in the Beaufort Sea coast and 25 to about 30 or so around the Chukchi coast. And once again, 6 to 7 foot seas in the open water, and watch out for heavy freezing spray in some of those areas. Recapping tonight's weather, winter storm warnings are in effect for the Chilkoot and the White Pass regions there, not affecting Skagway, but we are expecting 6 to 8 inches, generally above about 1,000 feet, and specifically around the White Pass area should see some of the heavier snowfall. A winter weather advisory is posted for the Yukon Delta region. Gusts there could reach up to about 45 miles per hour, so be prepared for blowing snow, maybe some drifting, and a few areas with stronger gusts might see some brief damage there. Watch for that and report it if you have any. As we go through the weekend, unsettled weather continues, especially across the Gulf Coast and southwest, with the strongest winds moving into the western Aleutians toward the end of the weekend. Have a good one.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.